Okay, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the fourth inquiry webinar. Thank you for joining us today. Apologies for the mistake on the Facebook event timing, and hopefully we can start it now. So as you must have seen in the poster, today's webinar will be focused on answering two main questions. When we make judgments about people and their actions, the judgments about whether what they said or did was right or wrong, is there a way to figure out the principles, assumptions, and reasoning behind our judgment? And if others don't agree with our judgments, how can we resolve those differences with clarity? And then, of course, we can discuss some of the ways in which we can learn to think in this manner. So on the panel with me today are KP Mohanan, who we call Mo, and Vignesh, and also Madhav. Madhav will be joining us to share the questions that all of you viewers posted the comments during the webinar. All right, so let's begin. Before we start talking about ethical judgments, it's a good idea to state clearly what we mean by that. So Mo, what is an ethical judgment?
Okay, let's take an example. Here is a situation. Here is a person, Zeno, who kills cats for amusement.
Mm-hmm.
If he told you that, what would be your judgment on Zeno's action? You would say, what Zeno does is ethically wrong. That will be a judgment if you hear about that. Mm-hmm. Our ethical judgment comes from a value system. Mm-hmm. And that value system allows us to consider some of the things as acceptable, some of the others as not acceptable, ethically unacceptable. Mm-hmm. We may not be aware of our value system consciously, but it is possible to reflect on it and figure out what it is that allows us to make those judgments.
So Mo, can I interrupt you there for a minute? Uh-huh. So what you pointed out earlier when was the difference between the situation that we described and our ethical judgment about that situation.
That's right. Yes.
And okay, and so now when we ask, how do we arrive at the ethical judgment, which is our next question?
Yes.
That's when. Yes.
That's exactly the issue. So we are trying to explore how we arrive at those judgments, the kind of reasoning that we have in arriving at those judgments. Mm-hmm. Our judgments may differ, but we'll try to keep those judgments which we share, all of us, but there might be occasional cases where our judgments differ. But what we are supposed to do is to focus on the unearthing of the value system, unearthing of the reasoning behind those judgments. Right. That's what we are trying to do in this webinar.
Right. So just to reiterate that, our ethical judgments arise from our value system, which allows us to consider some things ethically acceptable and others ethically unacceptable.
Absolutely.
Now we may not be aware or conscious of our value system. And in this session, we our own value systems, particularly, and see if our judgments are aligned with what we think we subscribe to. And yes, like examples that we use may differ.
Yes.
But our focus here is on the process of clearly unearthing the value system that underlies our ethical judgment.
Absolutely right.
Okay, so great. Once we see how to do this with individual judgments, we can move on to doing it with multiple people in the conversation. So let's use some examples to see what we're talking about, right? So Vignesh, let me ask you something. I have a friend named Zeno who tortures cats to amuse himself, right? It's a strange thing to, yeah. So is Zeno or judgment?
Tortures cats or kills cats?
Oh, sorry, he kills cats.
Yeah, okay.
My bad.
They're both bad, but I just wanted to be sure. Yeah.
Okay. So judge the act of killing a cat as ethically wrong.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So, all right. It seems now, what would be a principle or a kind of rule, so to say, that helps you arrive at this judgment uh, from this situation that Zeno kills cats to amuse himself?
Okay, let me see. Perhaps what I would say is killing an organism, a living organism, is ethically wrong,
Mm-hmm.
and cat is a living organism,
Mm-hmm.
and therefore killing cat is ethically wrong.
Right.
So yeah.
Right.
So in this, yeah, go ahead.
No, please continue.
Okay, so what we are showing here is that the premise 2 that we have highlighted in blue is basically the value system, or it stems from the value system of a person. And the principle is that for any human, killing living organism is ethically wrong. And the given situation is that Zeno kills the cat, and therefore the judgment is Zeno's killing of cat is ethically wrong. So the judgment comes from the principle. And this is what we call as the alignment between the principle and the judgment.
Yes, that's right.
So, in other words, the judgment follows from the value system.
Mm-hmm. Right. All right. So let me ask you another question then. Now, what if I told you that Zeno took antibiotic pills and this killed some of the bacteria in his body? But is that act ethically right or wrong?
I would not say this is ethically wrong. So my judgment is it is not ethically wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Zeno's consumption of antibiotics is not ethically wrong.
Mm-hmm. And
Yeah.
fall back to the principle that you used earlier, right? Then the logical then what would your logical conclusion be?
Okay. So that would okay. So the earlier principle that I had was killing an organism, a living organism, is wrong,
Mm-hmm.
and therefore, if I go by that principle, this particular case, I would have to conclude that Zeno taking antibiotic pill is ethically wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But my judgment goes against it, right?
Right.
My judgment is at conflict between the consequence of my principle and the judgment.
Right.
So how do we resolve this? So
Right.
there is a misalignment between the value system and the judgments.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah. So while your conclusion says that Zeno's consumption of antibiotics is ethically wrong, your judgment is that it's not ethically wrong for Zeno to do that. So, to avoid this conflict between judgments and consequences of principles, how do we resolve that?
Okay, one way to resolve this would be you have to change either the principle
Mm-hmm.
such that your conclusion and the judgment matches,
Mm-hmm.
or you will have to change the judgment.
Right.
So in this particular case, I don't think I'm going to change my judgment.
Mm-hmm.
I still think consumption of antibiotics is not ethically wrong.
Mm-hmm.
So which means I will have to change my principle.
Right.
Yeah.
So what would you change that to?
Okay, let me see. Suppose I change that to killing and organisms that belong to the animal kingdom is wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So now bacteria does not belong to the animal kingdom.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, Zeno's killing or taking antibiotic to kill bacteria is not ethically wrong.
Correct.
So now my principle or the ethical principle, the conclusion that I derive from my ethical principle and
Mm-hmm.
my judgment are in alignment.
That's right.
Vignesh, sorry, can you pick up your mic and put it to your face while you're talking? There's a lot of people who can't hear.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
All right. Okay. So what we've been doing so far in trying to check the alignment between our value system and our judgments is we've been trying to rigorously reason by clearly stating our and the situation, right? So rigorous reasoning of this type, in my understanding, is typically used in science and math. And even in the ethical domain, there are who do this. And it's useful to do this to ensure alignment between our value system, our judgments, and then moving forward, even our actions is present, right? Okay. So now let us consider a slightly more realistic example, right? Can we see the example on the screen? Yeah. So Jaya attends coaching classes to prepare for an exam. The fee of the coaching class is very high. Although she finds the classes boring and wishes she could know when she goes there, she attends them. She cannot quit because her parents won't let her. Veena is also preparing to write the same exam, but does not attend coaching classes because her parents cannot afford the fees. Both Jaya and Veena work equally hard to prepare for the exam, and both are equally capable. Yet, Jaya is more likely to score better in the exam because she attends these classes and has access to guidance that Veena does not, right? So I want to ask both Mo and Vignesh, what is your judgment in this situation? Let me start with Vignesh.
I think Veena is the most affected by the system.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I have a disagreement on that. I think I would say Jaya is the victim. Jaya is most affected by the system. And what the system does is, in fact, bad for Jaya. It is unethical.
All right.
No,
so, yes, Vignesh.
No, go ahead.
Okay. I'll just turn off my video to avoid problems in my audio. All right. So what appears to be happening here is that we have judgments that appear to be conflicting with each other, right? While Vignesh says that Jaya has an advantage, Mo thinks that Jaya is adversely affected. So let's unpack those judgments a little more. So Vignesh, why do you think Jaya is adversely affected?
Okay, Jaya and Veena are both intelligent and hardworking.
Mm-hmm.
Jaya attends expensive coaching classes to prepare for the exam, and Veena does not, because her parents cannot afford the fee. So there's nothing that Veena does not. I mean, this particular factor is beyond Veena's control, right? And because Jaya is attending the coaching classes or the classes, she would eventually get good scores. So this particular system gives an undue advantage to people who have access to certain things, or in other words, it allows some people to have an advantage over others due to uncontrollable circumstances. In this particular case, Veena's circumstance, she does not have a control over whether her parents can afford the fee or not. Therefore, this system is unjust to Veena, and that's why I say Veena is the most affected.
Right. Right. So now, can we unpack Mo's judgment a little more clearly?
Well, actually, my heart goes out to Jaya, as I said, because Jaya finds the classes extremely boring. She doesn't want to do well. Her parents force her. And what happens is Veena has an opportunity to do other kinds of things, those things that she finds valuable. And Jaya doesn't have a chance. Jaya is forced to sacrifice, waste her time on something that she doesn't want to do. So I would say Jaya is the victim. The system forces Jaya to do what she doesn't want to do. So it is extremely unjust to her.
Right. So even though your judgments are conflicting, they seem to be arising from different ethical principles, right? Mo, do you disagree with Vignesh when he says, with his ethical principle, uh,
Well,
that
actually, that's what I thought initially. But I can see Vignesh's reasoning, and I'm perfectly willing to agree that the system is unjust to Veena. And I have a feeling that Vignesh would agree that it is also unjust to Jaya. So maybe we can agree that the system is unjust to both. Vignesh, would you say that?
Yes, I would agree with you.
We thought we disagreed, but we don't really. Yeah.
right. So both your ethical principles did not actually contradict each other, but it was only their consequences that appeared to contradict each other, right?
Yeah.
And which is why explicitly stating the principles can help avoid unproductive debates and discussions where you think you disagree, but you actually might not.
Yeah.
All right, great. So now let's move on to another example and look at how other ways in which we can look for alignment. So we said earlier that for any human, killing a living organism that belongs to the animal kingdom is wrong. Vignesh, you used this principle to arrive at. So I have another situation, my friend Zeno, involving my friend Zeno, and it's that it's malaria season and Zeno kills a mosquito in his room, right? What is our judgment? Did Zeno do something ethically wrong?
No, it is not ethically wrong to kill a mosquito, particularly in a malarial season.
All right. So again, like you said, we have a judgment we follow from the ethical principle, right? So how can we modify the principle unless you want to modify your judgment?
Okay. So in this case, what we could say is that killing an organism is wrong unless it is for self-preservation. Suppose we say this, right? And in a malaria season, if you don't kill mosquitoes, you are likely to get malaria, and it's going to be sometimes fatal. Therefore, it is okay to kill mosquitoes during malaria season. So the modified principle now would be that for any human, killing an organism is wrong unless it is for self-preservation. So I'm changing the principle.
Right. So what we were doing here is I think we see two things. One, that it's okay to realize that you need to modify your ethical principle when you come across a new situation, right? And what we're doing is we're also so it's not that ethical principles that you use in one situation.
Can you repeat that? We lost you for a second.
Okay.
Can you repeat that?
Yes. So what I wanted to say is that here we're looking for alignment in judgments across situations, right? We're trying to apply the same ethical principle in various situations and making sure that our judgments are consistent across situations with our ethical principles, right?
So if I may interrupt, so when you say judgment across situations, so the first situation that we took was Zeno killing a cat. The second situation was Zeno taking antibiotics to kill bacteria.
That's
and
right.
the third situation is Zeno killing a mosquito in malaria season. So these three different situations, and if I may say, what we are looking for is a principle that would allow my judgments to be right across these three different situations.
In other words, to derive the judgment that you have from the same set of principles.
Okay, yeah.
Yes. So here what we're trying to do is unpack individual ethical principles and see whether they can be applied consistently, right?
Yeah.
Okay, all right, so I think this is a good time to take in some questions from the audience that we may have. So can I request Madhav?
I'm just going to turn on my video. Okay. Hi, everyone. We're going to start taking questions. So firstly, there were a lot of people who were trying to figure out their ethical principles based on the scenarios we had given in the comments. That was an interesting discussion going on. So the goal of our discussion today is not actually to find what good ethical principles would be, or what we would agree with as a group. The goal was just to extract the ethical principles which from our judgments. Okay, so we were just starting on ethical inquiry today. These other things can come in at a later point. But I thought it might be interesting to read them out. And if anyone has any reactions over here, I'll ask you for them. So Soumya says, would you say that killing the bacteria is part of the race for survival, which ultimately determines our position in the food chain, whereas killing the cat is not necessary for survival or otherwise? And Ayan says, I'm just going to give you this other one and then we can see if there's reactions. Ayan says, for a human, killing a living organism that does not pose any threat to his life is wrong. That would be a better principle. I'm assuming he's saying that would be a better principle than the one we had stated about if you're I forget the exact wording of the one which we had mentioned.
Yeah, so we said that for any human, killing an organism is wrong unless it is for self-preservation.
So he's saying to change that to killing a living organism that does not pose any threat to his life is wrong, rather than self-preservation. Well, Mo, do you want to?
That seems to be roughly the same. Any organism that poses a threat to one's life that's actually roughly the same as self-preservation, and there might be some slight differences. So let me begin by saying there are two different issues here. One issue is, what are the moral principles? What are the ethical principles that we should adopt? We are not saying anything about that. As Madhav said, what we are looking at here as a kind of introductory part of the inquiry is the reasoning that connects our judgments to the ethical principles. So the question that we're asking is, do our judgments follow from the ethical principles that we have? Not the question, what ethical principles we must adopt. That will be what ethical principles we must adopt is a big question that we'll pick up on some other occasion. But we are right now engaged with the question, what is your reasoning? Do the judgments follow from the ethical principles? Let me give an example. Suppose we say killing fellow human beings is ethically wrong, everything else is okay. If that is your ethical principle, then killing chimpanzees, killing elephants, killing cats, dogs, that should be fine. The judgment will be then, killing humans is bad, but everything, killing butterflies, killing tigers, there is no problem with that. That is what we mean by alignment.
Yeah. So actually, there was some interesting discussions in the comments where people were actually modifying their principles when new scenarios came in. That was the goal of the exercise.
That's right. Yeah.
To show you how you need to change the principles based on judgments, or change the judgments when your principles contradict with that. We didn't actually go through examples of that sort, but we did go through examples of that.
Actually, take Vignesh's case. If he stuck to the principle that killing living organisms is ethically bad, then he will have to have the judgment that killing bacteria is ethically wrong. There is no option.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But Vignesh chose to change the principle.
Okay, so we have talked about this, but I think it might be worth repeating again. Ayan asks, so what do we do when there's an inconsistency between judgment and logical consequence of ethical system? We must change our value system, right? Well, that not exactly, but I'll let someone pick that up. Vignesh, or?
I don't, we in this particular case, we are not changing the value system, but we are inquiring into our own value system. What is the value system that leads to that particular judgment? That's what we are looking at.
Yeah.
So most of the times we are not aware of or conscious of our value system and the principle that we have. And these situations, when you go through these situations, this helps us to unearth our own value system. So I wouldn't put it as changing the value system, but it is unearthing the value system.
Yeah. And I would add, in fact, something that Vignesh pointed out earlier, if there is a contradiction between the conclusion coming from our value system and our judgment, at least one of them should be changed. Either change the value system, the principle, or change our judgment. We are not saying which one. One of them should be changed in order to avoid the logical contradiction.
Yeah, and more when you say change the value system, you're not necessarily saying change the actual value system, but change the statements which reflect that.
That's
value.
right. The principle, ethical principle. That's right. Yeah.
So actually, related to that, Minnie asks, am I right if I say that ethical principles mostly depend on the value system? So I think that it's useful more if you can say what an ethical principle is, say what the value system is, and show and say what the relationship between these two things is.
Yes, that's actually a good thing to do. All of us value life. Given the value that we assign to life, we may adopt a principle such as destroying life is bad or retaining life is good. Okay, from these principles, certain consequences would follow. If you just say destroying life is bad, then it would imply that destroying the life of bacteria is bad. Okay, now we might stick to the value system of the value of life, but state the principles somewhat differently, because there might be other things that we value, and there might be consequences to those aspects as well. We can, for example, say that life is valuable, so is happiness. And if both are valuable, we have to make sure that our principles are stated in such a way that they yield the right predictions, the right consequences.
Okay. Okay. So the next question is from Sharat, who says, this reasoning ethical principles may differ from person to person due to his upbringing, his conditioning. If Zeno was brought up in a butcher's house, his mental framework would be different. Okay, so let me first separate out the reasoning from the ethical principles. The reasoning is not different, the mode of reasoning. What might be different is certain judgments. So more, or actually, Vignesh, would you pick up on that?
Yeah. So so in this particular case, the ethical principle would differ, but the reasoning and the consequences of the ethical principle, that is what we are focusing on. That sort of is a backbone to your judgment, coming to your judgment. So if I understand correctly, the question is, the ethical principles will differ from each individual. Am I right? So if it differs, yes, it would differ. It would differ between each individual. And in this particular case, we are only exploring what is a person's ethical principle. And then we have to move on to a group of people, and then to the society's ethical principle, and so on and so forth.
Yeah. So let me say on that that when Vignesh says ethical principles may differ from person to person, one thing is that they may differ, they may not, and the other thing is that that on many things most humans do agree, right? You do agree. I think on the judgment on torturing and killing cats for fun, I think most humans would agree that that's bad. On murdering humans for fun, most humans would agree that's bad. So there will be a lot of alignment across humans.
Yeah.
And that brings me to the next point from Lakshmi, which is a statement which says right or wrong is relative. Mo, will you pick up on that?
Yeah, the word relative, I'm not sure exactly what Lakshmi means, but I'm going to interpret it as relative to one's ethical principles. Yes, so that is the point that we have been making, that our ethical judgments must follow from our ethical principles. So let me go back to the earlier case of somebody who is brought up in a butcher family. And that person says, it is perfectly okay to kill goats. And then you ask the person, what about killing butterflies? Is that bad? And if that person says, it is bad to kill butterflies, but it is okay to kill goats. Now you're going to ask, what is your ethical principle such that you can get these two judgments from your ethical principle? That would not be an easy thing to do. So the strategy that we are suggesting is a way of cleaning up contradictions inside your mind. So to repeat, for somebody to say that it is okay to kill goats, but it is not okay to kill butterflies and cats, to propose an ethical principle that would derive both will be extremely hard.
Okay. Okay. So Palak Niti, I hope I've got the pronunciation right, says, in life, it might also be worth exploring how important it is to be consistent with judgment. Principle reasoning versus sticking to a principle and being inconsistent once in a while, consciously. Who wants to take that up?
Actually, that is true. This is the difference between actual practice, the norms and the actual practice. We all believe that, for example, telling lies is bad, but occasionally we lapse, and that is forgivable. But the question that we are asking is, what ought to be our norms, regardless of the occasional lapses?
Okay. Asha asks, why talk of mosquitoes or bacteria? How about execution of the death penalty by a state and a person getting murdered by some criminal? A person died in both situations. Okay, so the reason we did that was we want to start with simple things where there is alignment. I think everybody agrees torturing cats is for killing cats for fun is bad, right? But I don't think everyone on death penalty and so on, there might be certain amounts of disagreement, and those are places where we'll have to think a little harder. More than anything else.
But that's a very good question, though. Yeah,
it is.
Can I suggest something? We often see children also coming to terms with differences in judgments in different situations. So, for example, there's an interesting story of Think members doing ethical inquiry in a class, in a 6th grade classroom, and about whether it's okay to kill your enemy and who is an enemy. And I think that was a very interesting discussion that came out of it. Mo, would you like to share that story?
Yeah, actually, we were doing this in a classroom, and exactly the same kinds of questions arose. And everybody, all the kids in the 6th grade agreed that killing is bad. And then one kid said, oh, killing is bad, but killing an enemy is okay. So we said, okay, so we wrote down the principle, killing human beings is bad, but killing enemies, that is okay. And some other kid said, killing enemies, we ought to do it. Not only that it is not bad, but we should do it. So we wrote that principle on the whiteboard and said, we asked them, okay, who are your enemies? Do you have any enemies in your class? They said no. do you have any enemies in the school? They said, no. Do you have any enemies in the city? They said, no. And we said, so who are your enemies? Where are your enemies? If you don't have your enemies in the state, in India, then the kids said, oh, in Pakistan, Pakistanis are enemies. So we wrote down that Pakistanis are enemies, so we should kill all Pakistanis. And everybody agreed. So we said, okay, right now as we speak, there is a school in Pakistan, and like you, there's a bunch of sixth graders in that school. Let's go and kill all those sixth graders. And all the kids said, no way, you can't. But we said, look, you said we must kill all Pakistanis. And these kids are Pakistanis. So they said, no, you cannot kill the children. So we wrote that on the board. And then we said, okay, we can't kill the children, but we are going to kill all the parents of those children. And all the kids said, no, you can't do that either. So they modified their principle saying, you cannot kill the children or their parents. Then we said, okay, who do we kill then? So they said, Pakistani soldiers, we kill them. So we said, okay, some of these soldiers have parents and some of these soldiers have children, and that's okay, right? So we are killing some of the children of the parents and some of the parents of the. And the kids said, no, you can't do that. You can't kill the soldiers either. And that put, there was a kind of confusion in the class, and they started thinking about it. They had a group discussion, and they finally came with the principle that enemies are not Indian or Pakistanis. Enemies are the people who want to kill others. Whether somebody is an Indian or a Pakistani doesn't matter. Enemies are the bad people. Mm-hmm. Of course, we could pursue further, but in the sixth grade, we had to stop somewhere. We stopped there. So what this illustrates is using reasoning, precise reasoning, to look inside yourself and change your own ethical norms.
Mm-hmm. Right. So here, what the kids were doing was introspecting and constantly changing, introspecting, learning about their principles, and then also articulating their judgments and changing the principle to make sure that the judgment and the principle were aligned. Mm-hmm. And in doing that, you discover that what you thought you believed might not actually be something that you subscribe to.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
And that can be used for the earlier question, is death penalty morally justifiable? That's a very important question. We didn't address that, but these strategies can be used to address that question as well.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. One last thing before we move on. There's a question. There's a couple of comments about things like, is it a human tendency to believe that killing a more intelligent life form is more wrong than a lesser, and things like that. So questions of whether something is a human tendency or not is slightly different from the goals of this particular thing. That's a question in psychology. You're trying to understand what human judgments tend to be. Here we're trying to figure out what is the right thing to do. These are slightly different questions. They're related to each other, but different. Mo, do you want to add anything there?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. In fact, this is a question that various psychologists, as you said, have spent time on. But that's a different, though interesting, it's a different question. So maybe we shouldn't engage with that right now in this webinar.
Yeah, I just wanted to flag this distinction between a question about the truth about ethical judgments versus what our ethical system should be. I think.
Yeah, we are discussing the norm.
Yeah.
And the judgments that follow from our norms, as opposed to, there's a very interesting question. Why do human beings across cultures, across time, have these judgments, have these norms? So given a choice between killing butterflies and killing chimpanzees, I think most people would say killing chimpanzees is worse than killing butterflies. And we might ask the question, why is that so? That's an interesting question. But that is not a question about the norms we must have.
Yeah. There's also something which has come up about, like in some situations, killing a person might be the right thing to do. Or killing. So that's something. Vignesh, do you want to pick up on that?
some situations, killing human is right.
Vignesh, you are too soft. Can you make it louder?
Okay, maybe let me.
Yeah.
I still can't hear. Okay, Mo, do you want to?
Yeah, in fact, this question about the death penalty was like that. So somebody might argue that even though killing is morally bad, there are contexts in which killing somebody is the right thing to do. And this is where you need to look not only at death penalty, but also other things. For example, take euthanasia. If you allow death penalty, but disallow euthanasia, that is mercy killing, then you have to figure out what kind of ethical principle will give you those two different judgments. That is not going to be easy.
Yeah. Yeah, you could also have a hypothetical situation where, say, there's somebody who's trying to blow up a city with a nuclear bomb.
Yeah.
And in order to stop it, you have to kill that person.
Right.
To do to kill that person.
So the principle here would be killing one person. If the option is between killing one person and allowing thousands of people to die, then you might as well kill one person to save 1,000 people.
Okay, so Aditi, back to you, and I will get out of here.
All right. Okay. So what I would do now is I'd like to summarize or put together the different threads of what we did today. So what we did is we introspected and constructed a part of the personal ethical system of the members of today's panel, right? And what also came up in the questions, and what do we do after this, if you ask, we can address more complex issues. Like, for example, the question that came up, is there a conflict between allowing death penalty and war on the one hand, but not allowing abortion or euthanasia on the other? And by allowing, I mean considering the death penalty and war to be ethically acceptable, but not abortion or euthanasia. What we can use, what we can do further is also examine our own notions of justice, fairness, equity, and so on, by explicitly stating the principles, our ethical principles, and then seeing whether our judgments follow from those ethical principles or not. And this can give us insight into what we think is just, what we think is fair, what we think is equitable, and so on. There are other scenarios also, so where we might have to reason with incomplete information, where our judgments might change based on information that we receive later. So for example, in situation X, we might consider something to be ethically right. But when you learn something more about that situation, your judgment changes. We use something called defeasible reasoning in that case as a tool. And we can also use this process to think critically about our personal value systems and so on. And there can be other scenarios which explore these kind of situations. So let me briefly talk about the tools of inquiry that we used today. Today, we used reasoning and debating, and we used this in ethical inquiry. By reasoning, we mean spelling out carefully the statements that lead to any conclusion that we make. And today, what we were trying to do is match our ethical judgments with the conclusions of our ethical principles and the situation, information about the situation that we're in, right? Let me also go back to some of the previous webinars that we did. So in a previous webinar on mathematical inquiry and another one on historical inquiry, we used reasoning and justifying. Justifying as a tool of inquiry would involve creating a complete argument to support your claim, right? And we used both of these tools in both mathematical inquiry and historical inquiry. So this also shows that these tools of inquiry can be applied across domains. right? And you might not think that math and history may have anything similar to do in the process, anything similar about the process in which they are done. But what we try to show and what we will continue to do in these inquiry webinars is show that you can use the same tools of inquiry across domains. We also used the tools of inquiry of classifying and defining when we did a webinar on definitions of the term solid and liquid. So some other tools that we haven't done inquiry webinars about are observing carefully your environment, describing what you observe, explaining what you observe around you, and also reading critically information that you encounter in the world, right? So we hopefully will cover these tools of inquiry also in upcoming inquiry webinars. All right, Mo, Vignesh, would you like to add anything at this point?
I was wondering if people understand what you mentioned as defeasible reasoning. So I would like to just give one example. Suppose I said Zeno killed his dog. Your immediate reaction would be, oh, that was unethical of Zeno to have killed that dog, because it follows from the principle that killing living organisms is bad, or killing animals is bad, and the things that belong to the animal taxon. But now I give you some more information that Zeno's dog was terminally ill. It had cancer. It was going to die in 1 month anyway. And that 1 month would have been extremely horrible suffering for that dog. What is Zeno's option? What should Zeno do? Should Zeno put the dog to death mercifully? Or should Zeno allow the dog to live for a month very painfully? Most people would say, in this case, given the choice between the extreme suffering and merciful death is better. So this is an example of defeasible reasoning. The principle, the consequence from the principle that killing organisms that belong to the animal kingdom, that principle is defeated by the opposing principle that allowing organisms to suffer is bad. So that's defeasible reasoning. I just wanted to mention that this is also part of moral ethical inquiry.
Right. And for scenarios like the one you mentioned will allow us to not only understand the reasoning better, but also gain some ability to do ethical inquiry and other types of inquiry which involve defeasible reasoning.
Absolutely.
Right. All right, Vignesh, would you like to add anything?
No, Alti, you have summarized well.
All right. So if you enjoyed today's session, or if you found value in this, actually, we will be exploring the tools required to address questions like the ones we did today, and questions like the ones we have explored in previous webinars in our online course, Inquiry and Integration in Education. The application, you can submit your applications for the course now till 8th of May. Initially, the deadline was the 1st of May, and now we've extended it. So you can still submit your applications, and you can find more information on the course at www.think.education/IIE. So if you found value in this, do check out that online course. You can also find us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, and the handles are shown on the screen, and our website is www.think.education. If you haven't attended our previous webinars and would like to view their recordings, they are also available at our website, think.education/events. What I would like to also add that this will be our last inquiry webinar that we usually do on Sundays. We will be taking a break, last webinar for a while. We will be taking a break, and but we do have a webinar for parents if you're interested and how you can help your children think critically and develop inquiry abilities. That is on Wednesday, and you will find the details of that on our Facebook page and on all our social media websites soon. So stay tuned if you want to, if you find that interesting. Another thing that we wanted to mention is that for IIE, we have what is called a recommended course fee of rupees 15,000, and we encourage those who can afford to pay this amount to do so. However, if you cannot afford to pay this amount, please don't be discouraged from joining the course. Please apply for the course, and in the application form, you will find a section that tells you, that asks you how much you can afford to pay and how you would like to pay that amount. You can do so in installments or as a lump sum. So we do not want the course fee to be a discouraging factor for anyone from joining the course. So please don't let that stop you. All we need is your time, effort, and an open mind to gain some value out of this course. And we hope those of you joining us will do that. Have I covered everything? Would anybody like to add?
I think that's quite comprehensive.
All right.
Madhav?
No, I think that's good. I think we can end. It's a few minutes early, but we shouldn't stretch things if they're not required. That's not required.
Yes. So do continue to explore questions by yourself, and continue to use these tools of inquiry to introspect and answer your own questions. And if you have any comments or feedback that you would like to share with us, you can write to us at contact@think.education. Thank you for joining us today, and continue thinking.
Yeah.
And
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. We'll see you next time.